All right, we're recording now. Okay, so I've already gone over some of the introductory materials. Feel free to go to 4States One Source website to check out the ENDOTHERMIC stuff. So goals for these meetings, just to review, again, this is just time and space to check in, ask questions, report issues, and network. We do have station owner manager presentations each month. If you're interested in doing one of these, please be in touch. We're also having focused topic presentations that are more technical or ecological topics. And then Stroud is also just going to be providing updates on just everything going on from our end. So again, just to review, every third Thursday of the month, these are going to be ongoing, 2:30 to 3:30 every time. Zoom link should remain the same. I mentioned at the beginning, we've been having Zoom recondition their sort of platform a little bit. So we're going to just try to work within that without having to redo this link. And just a reminder that I will be sending out emails to folks about these meetings, but just make sure that, you know, as an owner or manager, please share these invitations with your volunteers and anyone else you think that might want to be involved or get some information on everything that's going on with this. So here's facilitators, me, Rachel, Krista Reeves, Shannon Hicks are the Stroud folks that are generally working to support this effort. And then we have the Master Watershed Stewards, Carol Armstrong and George Seeds from Chester and Delaware counties that are working with us as well on this. So we are recording these presentations. Everyone, just please keep your speakers muted. And please do speak up if there's some technical issue like Rachel just did. That kind of saved some time there. So thank you, Rachel. So these are recorded. Everyone should know this link by now, wikiwatershed.org/DRWI. All of the recordings are going to be there as well as the presentations themselves. Here's the general format we're going with: introduction, station owner manager presentation. Robert Sarnosky is going to be talking today. Then we have our monthly focus topic. That's John Jackson today. And then we're going to have open discussion and fails of the month, and then we'll conclude. We're certainly open to changing this as we go along and as needs change. So here's our agenda today. I mentioned Robert from Angelica Creek Watershed Association. He's going to be talking about his temperature monitoring that he's done. And he's also going to talk about just the general work of maintaining some of the stations in the Angelica Creek watershed. And then John Jackson is going to talk about water temperature as well. And then we're going to have open discussion and talk about some of these fails that we're calling them. And then we'll conclude. So just to reiterate, this slide we have every time, just to emphasize that the primary goal from Stroud's perspective is to support station owners in using the stations for their own purposes, as well as just simply maintaining the stations and keeping them functioning. And then the secondary goal is to analyze the basin-wide data set. That's been a Stroud effort recently, and I'll mention a presentation that was done on that at the Watershed Congress in September here in a little bit, right now actually. Deanna, Mark, and I did this presentation in September on spatiotemporal patterns of stream conductivity and temperature. Mark and Deanna did a really nice job, and there's a lot of good information in there. That recording is available at the Wiki Watershed DRWI site. Okay, more updates. I talked about this last time, but it's an ongoing effort, so I just wanted to make sure to emphasize it again. We are transitioning from 2G to 4G. 2G is being phased out by the end of 2020, so Stroud is going around and upgrading all stations that owners, in situations where the owners do want to upgrade to 4G, which is most of the time. So just a little bit of information on that. You can check your on Monitor My Watershed to see whether your station is 2G or 4G, whether it has been upgraded or not. Usually we'll be in touch, but there's times where maybe that information does get lost. So 2G, you'll see SODAC GPRSB under this panel in Monitor My Watershed, and for 4G, you'll see this label. Okay. So feel free to be in touch about that. Just a little bit of an update about the season type stuff. We're going to have a lot of fouling of turbidity sensors this fall with leaves coming into the stream. So just be aware of that sensors may need to be cleaned more often. This is just another example of the need to check Monitor My Watershed regularly. Daily is ideal. Visit the station regularly, ideally weekly. And then doing QC on a quarterly basis, and or, you know, certainly there's sometimes where it's necessary to do QC more often than that if you're getting weird readings from your sensors and you just want to be sure that it's functioning right. You go out and do a cross check with a calibrated meter. Another update here, we have a new battery charger that Shannon found. She needs to do a slight adjustment to it. So these, you can't buy these directly, but Shannon is putting together a limited supply of these, which we can provide to folks that need them to be able to charge batteries. Some folks need to charge and cycle batteries from time to time. So be in touch with us if you'd like one of these. Okay, and this is the battery that we're generally recommending to go along with that. But it's a nice feature because it shows you the volts right there on the piece of equipment itself. Okay, and then this is a topic that we were talking about before we got on today. I was having some trouble with getting photos to demonstrate some of the fails of the month, and it brought up the idea again of just having a group share. So this link has been shared in the past, but it really hasn't taken hold. So if possible, and assuming we'll have time, we should maybe try to discuss this in our question and answer and discussion period, and just see what people think about what might be most useful for a platform to share photos. And then George had a really nice idea as well of just possibly having a section in these meetings to just share photos of the month where folks could come to the meeting with their, you know, interesting photos to share to the group. So hopefully we can discuss that today. Yeah. So any questions before we move on from anyone? No? Okay. All right, so we are on to the station owner manager presentation for this month, and it is Robert Sarnosky, who is a PA master naturalist and works with the Angelica Creek Watershed Association. He has built his own temperature loggers, and he's also been a key person keeping Angelica Creek Watershed stations functioning. And I will stop my share and turn it over to Robert right now to do his presentation.
All right. Can you see that? Is it okay?
Yep, all good, Robert.
Okay. So I was very happy to be asked to do a little speech on what I'm doing here in the watershed at Angelica Creek. I am by day an inventory manager for a small electronics company, about 30 people. My alter ego is a citizen scientist and volunteer who's also a PA master naturalist. I do majority of my work with Nolley State Park, doing invasive removal, trail maintenance, painting, water testing, whatever needs to be done. A lot of state parks are, of course, very underfunded and very understaffed, so every little bit we do helps. I pitch in for the Angelica Creek Watershed Association through Burke's Nature, and the Tobahawken Creek Watershed Association, also through Burke's Nature. I do water testing for the Lancaster Conservancy with the Water Quality Volunteer Coalition down in Climbers Run, which is in Frogtown below Lancaster. I got involved with them when I was training to be a PA master naturalist, so I returned back there quite frequently to help out in a lot of the projects down there with the Chesapeake Bay and buffers and all that. And also Donegal Trout Unlimited, who also does a lot of the buffer repair work this year, especially along Fishing Creek. So I've spread out a lot of places. I sit right between Berks County and Lancaster County. So for me, going either direction, it really isn't a problem. I started the Stillwater Run project this year in January as kind of a personal project as well as a PA Master Naturalist project. I wanted to record some just basic baseline data about the creek that nobody had been doing anything with. Just a list of basic chemical data, alkalinity, nitrates, phosphates, dissolved oxygen, and so forth, just to build a base for future projects next year, the year after. I could see this going on for maybe 3 to 5 years of just testing, collecting data, building a general picture of the watershed itself. I spent a lot of time getting wet and enjoy all of it. Why did I pick Stillwater Run? Well, I basically said before, nobody had been testing on there. There wasn't anybody going out and doing any sampling of any sort. So I wanted to look at what was going on in the watershed and not just the stream itself. And I'll get into some of the sections I tested and why I did, but the one picture there is, of course, the trout that David is holding. He actually went and did a fishing trip and found some trout in the stream. So we were good to see that. That's a good sign. Also, the box turtle on the other side is something I do with Nolde Forest. We track and record the number of box turtles and how often they've been seen and record them and this all gets reported to the Fish and Game Commission. So it's about the watershed as well as just the stream itself. This quick little image here is showing you the basic outline of the watershed. Can you see my pointer? Okay, so the outline here is Nolde Forest. It comes all the way down here. So the watershed hits this side of the park, and the two sites were picked just because of their proximity to the park. So I didn't have to partner with a lot of people. I didn't have to go out and do a lot of work with the community and getting permission to go on people's property. It just made it a really convenient opportunity to touch on the corners of the park and not have to worry about a lot of legality and such. The larger image here is the Angelica Creek watershed and the blue section showing Stillwater Run. And of course, Nolde Forest continuing down here. The Punches Run Central Station is located right about this area here, which flows into Angelica Creek, which runs down this direction. So on either side of the mountain there of Nolde Forest, there's the Central Station as well as my temperature loggers. And it's just another picture showing this corner is where my upstream sensor is, and down here is where my downstream sensor is. And within about 200 meters of each of those sites is where I do chemical testing. So I'm focusing on just those two areas right now. I built my first logger probably in 2019 sometime. Didn't really have a use for it. I played around with it, coded it, set it in the window, recorded temperature, did those kind of things. When I started the Stillwater Run project, someone from the Angelica Creek watershed came to me and said that they'd really love to see some temperature data from the stream. And I thought, well, that's the perfect opportunity for me to install a logger and start collecting some data. So I went out and I built my first logger here on the side, really crude, built from the Mayfly starter kit, a box, a solar panel, and a temperature probe, and installed it in the stream and started recording some data. About end of February, in the beginning of March, someone asked me at a Monitor My Watershed workshop if I was uploading any of my data. And I hadn't been. I was collecting it and saving it just to add to whatever data I collected over the year. And they said, you should really be uploading this data. So I turned around, created an account, and then started uploading all the data I was collecting. Shortly after that, David got in touch with me, and he had noticed that I was uploading data, and he wanted to talk to me about what I was doing and how I went about building this, and offered or challenged me with writing an article on how I built it and step by step and all the pieces that were involved in getting this together. So in April, I spent about a month writing a blog post for EnviroDIY.org about how to build this sensor station, and you can read it online. It's freely available. All the code is there, all the instructions are there to build exactly this box as you need. After I wrote the article in May, I built my second logger and upgraded that to a different solar panel to give it a little more power, a little more streamlined looking, works a little more efficiently, charges the battery a lot better. And I went back later and upgraded the first one. So both of them look exactly like this right now, and they're very little maintenance, which is really good. The two sites in Stillwater Run, I have an upstream site and a downstream. Upstream is mainly a forested area. There are some residential there, but the main concern was this culvert that passes under Oregon Road. We were looking to see what kind of stormwater runoff would be affecting the stream, any kind of salts in the wintertime. Unfortunately, we really had no snow this year, so they didn't salt. So I wasn't able to capture any of that data. But for future use, this is a good starting point to look at this kind of effect that it might have on the stream. Downstream at the North Pond, the landscape is a little more open. It receives a lot more sun. So I was looking at what kind of water temperatures would be affected by open direct sunlight and this outfall from the North Pond. Now, when the pond gets high enough, it spills over and empties into the creek. And I noticed in the warmer months, you can actually stand in the water and you can feel the temperature difference from the water that comes out of the pipe. So this was a big concern that there might be some warming. And if I go back to this picture, up at this end of the stream, which is where this culvert is, there's a lot of, not a lot, a good deal of residential property. There's a pond right here where the culvert is, and there's another pond right here, and the stream flows right past. So I'm looking at possibly of temperature warming occurring here and here, and then spilling into the stream. This is a graphic of the first month that I had both loggers running simultaneously. So this goes from June to July, and you can see it's pretty much standard of what I was expecting to see the first time through. The blue is the downstream site, which I was expecting to be warmer because it's a more open area, receiving more light. And the other is the forested area upstream. So it looked very, very typical of what I was expecting. The following month, from July to August, there's a complete reversal. So the downstream site is actually now cooler than the upstream site. And the thought was that the pond water and the open residential area was heating up before it got to the forested area where the first logger is, therefore creating a higher temperature, flowing through the forest, cooling the temperature, and then flowing out into the second logger station. If we look and go forward another month into August into September, we kind of equalize back out again. It flip-flops. So now there's cooler downstream, warmer downstream, and cooler upstream. So there's a lot of looking into further from where I'm working now to really get a good idea on what is happening. But it seems like there's a lot of warming in the summer months because of the pond. You receive an excess of rain, it overflows, the warm water flushes into the water. It gets cooled as it goes downstream to the forest, and a lot of the springs that come off the side of the hill where it reaches the second one. Now, I don't have any factual proof that this is what it is, but it seems like a logical explanation. And I'm hoping John's presentation later, from what I've gleaned through, verifies some of this information. Oops, go back one. For quality control on what I do, I usually travel out every second and fourth Sunday of the month. So I do stream testing those 2 months. And since the logger stations are right there, I stop by and grab my data from the loggers. Since I'm not using any of the XP modules to upload, I have to manually upload. So I stop by the sensor stations. I do a quick check on everything, make sure the box is okay, sensors, the panel's clear, sensor has no algae, it's not buried in silt, everything looks good. I usually do a temperature reading before I remove the card. That way I know that the last reading that the box takes is usually within 5 minutes, the temperature that I'm looking for a QC. So using just a simple pen meter, hanometer, take the temperature, pull the card, check the box inside, make sure nothing's going on, as we talked about with bugs and moisture and all that. Make sure it's okay. And then clear out any vegetation that's around the area. Make sure nothing's blocking the light, nothing's growing up the post, that everything looks good. And really simple operation takes me maybe about 5-10 minutes to do, and I can move along my way. The sensor I'm using is a really inexpensive Seed Studio one-wire temperature sensor. Costs about $8. It has a Grove connector already installed on it, so there's no rewiring. There's plug it in, go. Of course, it's waterproof. It's a temperature sensor. Falls within the acceptable range of voltage. I don't have to change anything. It comes pre-wired with a resistor in it to do all the work for me. The temperature range, of course, -55 to positive 125, which I'll probably never see until the apocalypse. And the accuracy of the probe is plus or minus 0.5%. Now, so you're looking at 1 degree variance from whatever I'm reading, but I usually like to look at it as 0.5 is what my goal is usually to see what it's looking at. So I keep a log every time I go out. I record the date, the time, what I measured on the pen meter, the logger time, and when I get back home and upload my data, I look at the temperature that's been recorded on the card. This column here for deviation shows me all the different variations from what I've read to what the logger reads. And the majority of them all fall within the same range, 0.2, 0.3. Every once in a while you get a wacky reading like this one up here is 1.45. Don't know what happened there. Could have been a voltage problem when I was changing batteries. I'm unsure, but it wasn't a consistent problem. So you write that off as an extraneous value. Down here, you can see the average is 0.299 for my average deviation from meter to logger. So that falls way under the 0.5. Makes me feel pretty good that I'm getting a decent and accurate reading. Moving on, I didn't have any notes here, but the sensor maintenance for these Stroud loggers I work a lot with the one in Punches Run, simply because I'm a volunteer there and I'm there all the time. I look at that station quite often online just to make sure everything's flowing right, everything looks good, there's nothing wacky going on. When it rains, I like to look and see what the difference is in water depth and conductivity. And I think we've touched upon this for a couple meetings now, and the real key thing I think to sensor maintenance is really understanding your watershed, or understanding at least where the logger is located, so that you know whether your readings are valid or not, and what you're seeing is really truthful. Because you can open up the browser and go to your site and say, oh, look, conductivity's up. Okay, what does that mean? That, without knowing how your site is working, those values really don't have a lot of meaning to them. They're a little arbitrary. So if I'm looking at this site here, I know my area of high water is probably about here until it spills over. So when I'm looking at a reading, if I get a really high reading, I could probably guess that something's not right because it's out of the range of where it would flow. If I'm getting something really low, the same thing is true. I know, well, this gets fairly low because Punches Run is maybe ankle deep at most points. This sensor station location is a little deeper. Also, being a little deeper causes a lot more turbidity problems because this water flowing off of these rocks here into this pool slows down greatly. So the water comes off and the water slows through a trickle. Well, the sediment drops and starts to create a layer underneath. So by looking at Monitor My Watershed, I can see right away, well, my turbidity is slowly going up, slowly going up. It might go from 4 to 5 to 6 to 7 over a course of a couple of days. I immediately know that I have to go out there and flush all that out of there because it's just slowly building up and building up. If I see something spike, I know right away, oh, it's a leaf or a branch or something like that. And you kind of get, just by knowing and visualizing what your site looks like, you can read Monitor My Watershed and say, oh, I know what that problem is. Oh, I know what that problem is. Now, occasionally you get the wacky reading of, we just replaced the turbidity sensor when the values dropped all of a sudden. I was going from months of reading 4, 5, and 6 to 1.5. there's a flag right there. I know something's wrong because I know the site never gets that low just by working with it all the time. So sensor maintenance really is, I don't want to say an art form, but it's a balancing act of really going out and maintaining and cleaning your sensors, but also knowing what is a real problem and what isn't a real problem by judging your site. I also do some work at the 2 Angelica Creek sensor stations right at Berks Nature, not as much as Punch's Run, but since the whole beginning of the COVID thing, people aren't getting out as much. So when a problem would happen, if it wasn't resolved in a few days, I kind of got itchy and I would go out and, tackle a problem here and tackle a problem there. I don't normally like to do that because I want everybody to participate and have their say in, oh, I went out and I did maintenance, or I want to make it my own. But if people can't get out there, I'm more than willing to just jump in and do the work and help out. But I don't want to be the, oh, those are my sensor stations, you can't touch those. And that's not my thing. So it really is just a balancing act of knowing what's going on. I know this last bit was kind of rushed and really off the cuff, but I didn't know how to really bring that all together to make it really make sense. But I think it is just knowing your watershed and your area, how the stream works. I'm going to leave it at that. If anybody has any questions, I know I rushed through it. I was kind of on that, oh, I got to make 10 minutes and, kind of blew through there, but please feel free to ask me anything at all.
Those were great points, Robert, and it makes me think another blog from you describing the subtleties of station maintenance would be very useful. Ha ha ha.
Yeah, Robert, don't worry about 10 minutes. Dave never talks for only 10 minutes.
Yeah, I went over, and John is notorious for that too. So I'm going to immediately pass.
Excuse me, you can't throw me under the bus after you two blew the schedule
I
up.
just did.
Nice try, but as far as I can tell, I'm not behind schedule. You are.
Yeah.
No, you are not. We are exactly at 3 o'clock right now. Hopefully, John has about 15 minutes, so we should have about 15 minutes at the end, and I guess we'll probably just go a little bit over. But John, why don't you just share your screen and have at it?
Okay. Why is it not coming up?
We see your screen. There you go.
I got nothing.
Wait. Now it's just a black sort of timed presentation thing.
I think PowerPoint just crashed.
It's coming through, John.
Is it? Because
Yeah, no problem.
my computer is locked up. So let's see if I can switch screens.
See if you can put it in presentation mode.
That's what I did, and that's what
Okay.
shut her down. Yeah, PowerPoint just crashed. So hold on, let me reload the file.
Just try converting it into a PDF and maybe just show the PDF.
Yeah, that would be smart, wouldn't it? Since PowerPoint is a notoriously bad piece of software. This is the PowerPoint or the PDF that I loaded up. I think Dave loaded it up for you guys. So what I'm going to talk about today is, and can you see this now?
Share your screen again, John.
Did that get lost?
Yeah.
All right, hold on. PowerPoint's trying to restart.
I guess it's one of those days. I forgot to record, and also forgot to share my screen at the beginning too.
For some reason, there's share screen.
There we go. Perfect.
You got that? All right. So I'm going to quickly roll through a bunch of basic biology, and then you're also going to see some things that are going to overlap directly with what Robert said and what Robert's observing. So I just titled this thing Ecological Significance. It probably needs to be distilled more, but it's I was drawing from my lectures at Penn and things like that. So welcome to college again. So first things, why is temperature important? First of all, it's important because it varies temporally and spatially. If there was no variation, it wouldn't be very ecologically interesting. So you have differences in day versus night, winter versus summer, mountain versus valley, temperate versus tropical. And the temperate tropical is both a spatial thing and a seasonal thing, because in terms of temperature, the tropics don't see much seasonal variation. But you have all of this, the other things going on. Day versus night, for example, is quite important in the tropics. Temperature underlies rates for chemical reactions. This is something that you all know, but you probably don't think about it. And it's those chemical reactions that end up affecting biological functions, whether they are larger ecological functions or cellular processes. And in the end, those translate into differences in biological distributions. In other words, we find species distributed based on temperature. So some illustration of variation, daily variation. Diel is what we call it. We don't use diurnal because behaviorists refer to nocturnal and diurnal as being night active and day active. Diel, D-I-E-L, is a 24-hour cycle. And this is just two ways of looking at it. These are two lakes. The small one is in red and the large one is in blue. And the small one heats up and cools down every day. And the large one, because it takes a lot of energy to change water temperature, it varies little. And these are just those data plotted on a 24-hour period. So you can see low point is always right around dawn, and a high point is somewhere towards late in the afternoon, 4 to 6 p.m. One of the things I always tell people is if you want to know what's going on in terms of temperature and stress and stuff, you can go out at dawn and take a DO measure and a temperature measure and see what your nighttime sag is, and then you can go out in the warmest, brightest part of the day and do the same thing. That's for lakes. We see the same thing for streams. So this is temperature expressed as degree days, and that's just number of degrees. So 10 degrees all day, you might measure that versus 20 degrees all day, or average temperature. These are all sites around White Clay Creek at the Stroud Center. And I like to throw this in just to illustrate, for example, the colder temperatures, so fewer degree days in the winter, and then you pick up more in the summer, and then you pick up less in the winter. And you'll notice that the one with the greatest variance has both the warmest temperatures as well as the coolest temperatures. The straight line here is a spring brook, and we'll get to habitat in a second. But that's kind of your basic temperature regime for a temperate waterway. Another thing to keep in mind is that stream temperature starts with groundwater temperature. And very few people think about that. And groundwater temperature is average air temperature. So around here, it's going to be somewhere Fahrenheit-wise between 50 and 54 degrees. And, it's colder in the north and warmer in the south. One of the things I like to point out here is remember, these are long-term. It takes a long time to change groundwater temperature. So global warming on a 10-year basis, for example, the air may be changing, but the water is going to be greatly delayed. But eventually, if you see, say, if you look here, 13.8 versus 16.4, this is almost a 3-degree change, and you're going to go from southern Pennsylvania down to North Carolina. So when you think about how temperature change in climate change reflects a geographic change. It's about experiencing North Carolina conditions in southeastern PA when the groundwater eventually catches up to air temperature. We have this seasonal pattern, and this is the same graph I showed you before, but here I'm going to emphasize the stream type. So this is groundwater on the A line here, and that is temperature coming out of the ground, and it doesn't vary. These are, you know, deep old water coming out. It hasn't seen daylight in a long time. Whereas B, and you can look at this later, is the spring seep, and C is the spring brook, and then you go to first and second and third order streams, and your stream is getting bigger. And as the stream gets further away from that groundwater source, the amount of seasonal variation increases because the temperature is governed more by air temperature than it is by ground temperature. So the groundwater is ground temperature, but by the time you get to the third order, you're really seeing the air temperature influences. And this again, so emphasizes that the size of the body of water, whether it's a lake or a pond or a stream, makes a difference. So the large lake doesn't change much versus the small lake right next door. Stream size also affects the amount of range that you see. And I just showed you that where when you start down here at 0, this would be groundwater. And as the stream goes to first to second and third order, the diel regime varies as it gets bigger, and it peaks somewhere between third and fifth orders, and then it starts going down. So if you ever go out to the Susquehanna and take the temperature at dawn and dusk, it varies little. It's somewhere between a seventh and eighth order river, and it doesn't change that much because it's a big body of water. It takes a lot of energy to change its temperature. So now we're going to transition to some chemical reactions and remind you that temperature can drive chemical reactions. And these are the endothermic reactions, such as melting water, as opposed to an exothermic chemical reaction. And that would be like burning wood that gives off heat as opposed to needs heat in order to proceed. And here are some examples of common things that you don't think about of endothermic reactions, but you warm up water, you can dissolve more salt. You're not going to cook an egg or bake a loaf of bread if you don't apply heat. And believe it or not, photosynthesis has a direct tie to temperature. And here I'm going to show that to you. So this is temperature and rate of photosynthesis. And when the things are cold, you'll have very little photosynthesis as a rate. You'll still be there, but it will be very cold, or very low. So below a glacier or in a pond in Antarctica, it's so cold, your photosynthesis is occurring, but it's very low. As you warm it up, you get more and more molecular collisions, and that's part of what increases the rate of photosynthesis. At a certain point, it peaks. And then after that, your temperature starts causing enzyme breakdown and things like that, denaturing, that feeds back negatively on your photosynthesis. The same kinds of things can happen in animals. So in the animals, whether there are aquatic macroinvertebrates or a fish, we call them poikilotherms. You might call them cold-blooded animals. These are animals, their body temperature depends on outside temperature. So when the water's cold, the frog is cold. When the water's warm, the frog is warm. This is what it looks like when we graph it. So this is ambient temperature. I stole this from a German article. This is body temperature. A poikilotherm, we warm up the air or we warm up the water, and the body temperature goes up, and it's very linear. A homeotherm is like you or me, a mammal. It doesn't matter to us whether it's a cold day or a warm day. Our body temperature is going to be the same, 98.6. And then you have the alternative where you can maintain your temperature for a certain point, and then after that, you lose the battle. And this we see commonly in some invertebrates that in order to fly, for example, they work hard to maintain a body temperature with solar radiation, but after the temperature drops or the sun goes down, they start going back to cooling. Within these kinds of reactions, though, you also have a range of tolerance. So you have some that are tolerate only a narrow range. We call them stenotherms, and some that are tolerant of a very wide range of temperatures. We call those eutherms. And those are well known in that a stenotherm occurs usually in something that sees very little variation, and they're not happy when you put them in a variable temperature, a more widely variable temperature and habitat. So if you live below a glacier or you live below a hot spring, whether it's hot or cold, you're used to that narrow range of temperatures. So how does temperature affect life cycles? This is something the Stroud Center's been working on temperature, since back in the 70s. And we continue today. It's just well known that temperature is important to stream organisms. We've taken the approach that that affects individuals, and when you affect individuals, then it affects the whole population. And when it's affecting multiple populations, it's the whole community. So you're going from individuals to a single species to multiple species. And that's how we view it and its effect on a stream or on a river or a lake or pond. And temperature affects the individuals and cascades through populations and communities by affecting growth, survivorship, development time, and then body size. And in the case of body size, that translates into the number of eggs a female can produce. And in a model form, if this is increasing temperature, when we warm it up, growth rate increases. Those biological reactions go up. At the same time, they develop faster, so development time goes down. They come out smaller, so body size goes down. Because they're smaller, the number of eggs a female might produce goes down. So you suddenly have growing quickly, coming out smaller, but taking less time, but having fewer eggs. So there's these pluses and minuses that get balanced out. So when we do the science, these are data for a mayfly we ran at constant temperatures ranging from 14 all the way up to 30 in the lab, just looking at first survivorship, then development time, then body size, then their growth rate. And what you see is if you go, there's just these constant periods like temperature. Temperature's unaffected for a bunch of temperatures. Or survivorship's unaffected, and development time just kind of goes down, and body size kind of goes down, and growth rate goes up, and development rate goes up. And degree days is really very consistent. In other words, by changing the time, you accumulate it, you grow faster, and so it takes the same number of degree days at a colder temperature as a warmer temperature. But then we highlight the exceptions, and these are where this temperature becomes a stressor and temperature starts breaking the rules. So everything's kind of consistent here until we hit these warmer temperatures. This is where your physiology is breaking down. So you're having lower survivorship, your development time's no longer changing, you're struggling. The body size does a big drop on the few that are able to survive. The growth rate starts going down, the development rate starts going down. And it shows up nicely on the cold end and on the warm end that degree days are no longer counted consistently the way they were in this middle range. These are the red flags for us that suddenly these individuals translate into a population at these temperatures that would be struggling, and multiple species experiencing things like this, you have community changes. So let's talk about the biological implications. Well, this is really always a point of discussion and possibly contention in fisheries, because we have these definitions, cold water fisheries, warm water fisheries, and we have these classifications of bass and bluegills being warm water fish, and trout and salmon being cold water fish. And then you have these things like walleye and believe it or not, white suckers are considered transitional or cool water species. And this is a way of talking about things. The trick is the science behind all of this. The lab and the field stuff is never as simple as you might hope. This was a study that was done by a friend of mine who works out of Denmark, but he's done a lot of work in Ecuador, and he just plotted maximum street temperature versus the number of insect families that he could collect at a site. So these are different sites from Denmark and Ecuador, and they line up nicely. In other words, cold temperatures in this case become more and more extreme, and only a few species can you handle where 5 degrees is your maximum. But remember, this is going to be at the bottom of a glacier or somewhere probably in Ecuador well above 5,000 meters or so. It's going to be way up there. So this is all about natural stuff. These are natural distributions. So the last thing I'm going to mow through is how we've messed this up. These animals have dealt with temperature temporally and spatially for millennia, for thousands and thousands of years. And then people come in and they cut down the forest. They take running water and turn it into standing water. The urban areas they create become heat sinks, and then they dump water into the stream, and that water may not be the same temperature as the stream. So let's look at this, and this is just a gross generalization. Deforestation affecting the thermal regime. Once you cut down the forest, it tends to be cooler than normal in the winter and warmer than normal in the summer. And that has to do with the effects of the forest or the absence of the forest. You throw up a dam, and the effects of a dam really depend on how the dam is managed. But this is an example where the natural thermal regime is here. And it's just like I showed you before, it bounces around a lot. Below the dam, this is the thermal regime that's coming out of the dam. And basically the reservoir is warming up all summer, peaking September, October, and then starting to cool down. So instead of peaking in June, July, and August, you're peaking in September, October into November. You completely altered the thermal regime. You can see very different things than this, depending again on how the dam is being managed, whether the water's being taken out of the bottom or out of the top. Ponds have the same effect. This is one that's in the Stroud Center's backyard that we've been working on it for a few years. And I forgot to put in a picture to show you this. We basically have a stream that flows out of a pond, that's this red line, goes through almost 1 kilometer of woods, that's this blue line, and this green line here is our temperature reference. So this is June, July, and August. The pond water is running quite hot. It cools as it goes through the woods, but it never gets as cool in the summer as our thermal reference. This is how it looks like, and I throw this in for you to understand the degree of change. So this red line here is the upstream relative to the Cheslin, the temperature reference. And on average, it's averaging 7.5 degrees centigrade warmer than our thermal reference. So that reach of stream is well beyond what most of us are hoping for or expecting for thermal pollution associated with climate change. And that's already happening. Add on top of that, what obviously climate change is going to do. So this reach is struggling. The blue is the difference between the downstream and the upstream, and this is the cooling. And what we've done there is we've cooled it by putting it into a forest. So we've erased some of that thermal pollution from that pond. And the difference is 2.5 degrees in this data set. So that forest, 1 kilometer of forest, took away 2.5 degrees of thermal pollution, and hopefully more than that afterwards. Well, the sensor network has some data on this, and I just grabbed this. This is a data set that's been widely used, and unfortunately, it's so darn clean that I'm not sure I trust it. But these are the data points on the line, and this is delta T. This is the difference between mean temperature at a developed stream versus an undisturbed section nearby. And this is just impervious cover versus basically increase in temperature due to development. And as you increase impervious cover, the mean temperature goes up and up and up to reaching that point that matches very similar to what we just described, an 8-degree change. this is something that's rarely talked about. This has to do to some degree with ponding, but as much as anything, this has to do with urban areas being heat islands. They're just holding heat, and that hot air is being absorbed by the stream. It's not as much these little thermal events that we see. This is a short-term event, a spike in discharge, temperature goes up and goes down, and we go through our daily swing after that. One of the things, though, that we have happening in these urban areas, and this is impervious cover versus the number of summer days with surges, is as you increase impervious cover, you get more days with surges. In other words, you're getting more of these thermal pulses. And it is possible that those individual events accumulate as a stressor, but we don't know that. Nobody's run any science slapping a series of thermal surges. I think more than likely, to be honest with you, is the sites that are getting these surges are running warm all the time, and that has a bigger impact than the thermal surge. This is a data set out of Japan, where the lower lines here are the seasonal temperatures in a stream in 1965, and then 70, 75, 85, 95, up to 2004, and 2004 is at the top here. And the difference between 65 and 2004 is this stream slowly received more and more treated wastewater. This is just sewage, treated sewage. But as it becomes a greater volume of the overall stream, look at this. This is January. Instead of being down at 10 or 12 as your mean temperature, it's now banging around 18. That's how much the effluent is warming this stream up. And that's something that we took care of when it was coming out of power plants. We don't pay attention to it when it comes out of sewage treatment plants. Last thing is just a simple diagram when you have a single species, in this case, brook trout versus impervious cover. You can assume that some of this dropping off is due to temperature. Some of it has to do with the increase in urbanization, but a lot of this is probably it just became too warm for brook trout. And you notice how abrupt it is. But you'll also notice that there's a whole bunch of sites here that have little or no urbanization, but they had little or no brook trout. So you can't blame this completely on brook trout, but or on temperature. But the authors do give temperature some credit. So when I think about urbanization or even agriculture, I ask, is the waterway open or is it shaded? Does it have a streamside forest? This is one of the reasons why we pay so much attention to restoring buffers. And as Robert showed you, it doesn't take much much forest to change the temperature. You cut it down, it starts warming up immediately. Dave Bresler told me the other day that he measured a 1 or 2 degree difference just at a road crossing. Does the stream receive warm water from ponds, retention ponds, stormwater ponds, things like that? In the old days, we put a lot of ponds right in the streamway, and that has done nothing to help this temperature problem. Are we looking at wastewater discharges, and does the runoff to the stream flow across hot surfaces? All things to be considered. The importance of temperature, this is something you may want to Google around. It's called the stream functions pyramid. And there's very little I like about this. I don't believe that our stressors in streams and our restoration of streams are tied to their biggest part of the pyramid. This was put together by people who are very interested in geomorphology and hydrology. But you'll notice under physical chemical, they highlight temperature as a target, a function. Maintaining a cooler temperature could be something that's targeted for restoration. So things to remember for these aquatic animals, temperature is important. It's really important. Temperature varies naturally, and people have modified temperature far more in many cases than climate change. And it's happened already. It's happening right now. And in fact, temperature was such an obvious pollutant back in the 70s that it was probably the first pollutant in our streams and rivers that we addressed. We addressed how dams were functioning, and we addressed how power plants were dumping hot water. They put in cooling towers, and dams put in mixing towers so that they weren't running too cold or too hot. So that's all I have for you. We can ask take a few questions if we have time.
Hey, John, this is Dave Yake. I was interested in that pyramid chart because at the bottom there it talks about hydrology.
Yeah, that's a big lie.
You know, there are seasonal trends to the base flow in the streams and the percentage of the water that would come out of, let's say, shallow groundwater versus, let's say, deeper aquifer where they have the lower temperatures. And so I could see where that would affect some of the temperature profiles.
This is something I highlighted right here in urban areas, because urbanization tends to drop your groundwater because you don't get the infiltration. With urbanization, you see a lower base flow in the summer. And when you get that lower base flow, you have less volume of water. And so your temperature can actually run warmer than normal.
Right.
At the same time, if your channel's been blasted out, or if someone in their infinite wisdom decided they knew how it should look and they bulldozed it wider and shallower, but you still have this low summer base flow problem, you can amplify your temperature problem because you now have this wide, shallow waterway with a lot of intimate contact with either the sun or with warm air. Both of those are actually a problem for maintaining those cooler temperatures or more natural temperatures.
Okay. We are at 3:29 here, and we've yet to have the main portion of the meeting. So I guess we need to adjust our situation here. I think I'm going to share my screen, but I think what we should probably do is just go to we should at least, you know, have some time here to just open it up to questions and issues that are just kind of at the forefront of people's minds. So why don't we do that, and we'll see if there's anything pressing from anyone, and go from there. So anyone have anything that they really want to bring up as far as issues, questions, whatever? Questions for either the presenters or just more so just anything in general.
David,
Yes.
this is Tom Brooks.
Hey, Tom.
I noticed you had a slide there that mentioned something about -999 readings.
Good.
I've been seeing that at Upper Rocky Run and wasn't quite sure how to interpret it.
Great question, Tom. So here's what I had. This, for whatever reason, has been coming up more lately. So -999 indicates the Mayfly data logger is not properly communicating with the sensor or the cell module, depending on where the 999 is coming up in monitor. So I think you're seeing it on the sensor readouts, right, Tom? Like on on conductivity or depth or something?
Yes.
Yeah,
And
so-
I see that that graph on the right on received signal strength. That looks familiar as well.
Okay. So it's either, to put it simply, it's either a headphone jack issue, so where the sensors actually connect into the Grove adapters inside, that will be inside the logger box itself. So you can open the logger box up and check that. And Rachel, chime in here if you want to add anything. Or it's an actual, you know, situation in which the sensor wire is damaged. And in that case, if it's the CTD sensor, you're going to have to replace the sensor itself. Or if it's a turbidity sensor, you can just replace the wire. But there's another possibility that it could be some coding issue. So the -999 is sort of just a default to signal that there's not proper communication happening between the board and the sensor or the cell board. So essentially with Upper Rocky, if you go in there and check a little more specifically where you're getting -999, that'll indicate, if you're just seeing it in the conductivity, temperature, and depth, then it's going to indicate there's some issue either with the headphone jack or the wire. If it's the -999 on the cell phone panels, then it's gonna mean something else.
Yeah, I do see that graph on the right, and it confused me because it was transmitting the data successfully. So I didn't know how it would impact the data.
Well, I'm guessing that the data are still logging to the SD card. But that seems to be, the 4G cell boards are a new thing, and there's been a few issues coming up with just sort of the functionality of those. Some of them seem to be failing. So it may be that you have a failed 4G board, and Upper Rocky is on our list for troubleshooting. So just, maybe shoot us an email and just kind of, it's already on the list, but maybe we can try to schedule a time here sometime soon to get out and deal with that. Rachel's been working tirelessly, just kind of out troubleshooting the 70 stations across the basin. Rachel,
Yeah,
anything to add on that?
I did take some screen prints of the readouts, so I'll forward those on to you.
Okay.
Yeah, I
Thank-
think the received signal strength getting the -999, that's something new that we've been seeing. And Tom, you made a good point that the data is making it online. So it's not a failure of the 4G board itself because it's still transmitting the data, but something's happening either on the website side of things or the communication that it's just getting a bogus value. But to touch on the CTD getting the 999s, if you see that on any station, a good first thing to do is go out and check along the red wire to make sure that it hasn't been chewed or nicked or anything like that. And then also to check that connection. Yeah, that picture there on the left there. You'll see that if something like chews it and breaks the, really anywhere along that wire, it could be a tiny little nick and you'll lose connection with it. But either that or checking to make sure that it's fully plugged in at the headphone jack could be two good first steps to do. Because otherwise we'll have to come out and replace things. So really that's all you can do to kind of help us out.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, I'm Kevin Morrissey. I'm from Silver. I work with Francis Collins on Primrose.
Great, Kevin.
I've got to go. I've got to run to a couple more meetings, but I just want to say this has been great. I look forward to next month. So thank you very
Excellent.
much.
Excellent. Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you,
All right,
Kevin.
bye now.
Bye.
Bye.
So what else? Other questions, other issues to discuss? See, a few people are needing to go. We can stay on as long as folks want, but feel free to go if need be, obviously. Nothing else? All right, well, I will just go through a few things here.
Sorry, could I ask a question just
Of course,
before
Carol.
I was muted for a second? So is a minus, so on that signal strength indicator, is it only a -9999? That would be a bogus value, or what about other minus numbers? What about -69, for example, as it shows on the Montgomery School site? That's the only place that it's a strange number. I was just wondering, is that also considered?
Carol,
everywhere?
are all the other values positive values or
Yes,
they are?
yes.
Yeah, I would want to believe that it is, but honestly, I don't know enough about it to say one way or the other. But I know that we've been having a lot of trouble with these 4G boards just dying and malfunctioning with the software that's on the 4G board itself. So those little blue boards are actually programmed with their own code aside from the Mayfly, and the 4G boards have been having a lot of problems. So yeah, if it's giving a negative value, that's good to know. It might be an indicator of a future failure or just something to keep an eye on. It's different than what you're used to seeing. So it's good to pay attention to, but I'm not sure what it really means.
Right, okay. And it doesn't indicate which, yeah, never mind, you explained it. It's not sensor related. So it's not going to predict failure of a sensor. It might predict a failure of the Mayfly board.
Right, on the cell board itself. So it doesn't have anything to do. The receive signal strength is only referring to the little blue board that plugs into the Mayfly, which is the cell board.
Thank you.
I just wanted to add, you're talking about the negative number there. If it has the dBm after it, the signal strength itself, I believe, and from what I'm looking at here, that all those numbers are going to be negative because it runs like a good signal is -70, like a bad signal or getting worse is going to be -110. So I think that number
That's normal.
is always going to be normal. That's a normal to have that negative.
Yeah, I get the two confused because there's also a percentage.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you, Robert.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I found the screen prints and it's on the percent full scale and the received signal strength.
Both of those are for Upper Rocky you're talking about, Tom?
For Upper Rocky, it's -9999.
Is it still currently online or did it drop off after those readings?
I can check online. These are just screen prints that I took the last time I was out there.
Oh, okay.
I'll forward it on to you.
Yeah, and we can check that.
Hey, Dave.
Yeah.
Dave, it's Charlie Calder.
Hey,
I did
Charlie.
notice that all the received signals, they're all negative. They're either -45, -57, -69.
Yeah, so that's what Robert was just mentioning.
Yeah,
And
okay.
this really speaks to, you know, the importance of just tuning into, you know, more and more just tuning into the subtleties of all of it. As Robert was explaining in his presentation, not only the subtleties of, you know, the field component of what's happening in the field, but tying that back to what you're seeing in the data on Monitor My Watershed, and not only the data from the sensors, but the data from the cell feedback. So that's certainly not, there's never an end point there. You know, in this science realm, you're always there's always room to delve deeper and look at more details. So there's never an end point. So I think we all can just continue to kind of develop and articulate our knowledge on this stuff.
Yeah, I think the negative numbers on the received signal strength are only on the 4G. So if you've just changed the 4G, that may not be familiar to you.
Yeah, exactly. There are different panels for 2G and 4G.
Yeah, and I do notice this is still on 2G.
It is still on 2G as far as I know. Now there are a few I know that Shannon, I don't think this is one of them, but there are a few that Shannon upgraded to 4G and may not have actually changed the information in Monitor. But I don't think Rocky is one of those though, Tom.
Okay.
If it were 2G, would it be reporting signal strength?
It does in a different way, I believe. If I'm not having a picture perfect image of what it looks like with the 2G, but it is different.
Yeah, the 2G, Dave, or Carol, is the it says percent of signal strength, and when you have the 4G, it will have two panels, which the one panel will be the received signal strength, I believe, which is the negative number.
Okay.
Okay. How are we doing on time here? We're at 3:43. Questions from other folks? Anything? For the folks that are still here, we've got 15 folks still here. I will just breeze through this other kind of stuff we had. Just emphasizing some of this stuff of like just checking your seams, making sure that there isn't debris in there, wiping the seam, making sure there's not grit in between the seams, making sure the locks are locked. All that type of stuff is going to help if the water, if these loggers do end up getting flooded or turned over in a flood entering the water. Vandals and such, you know, making sure to lock the station down here at the bottom as opposed to the top. The top allows someone to access the logger a little easier. They can kind of pry it open. Actually locking the lock and putting a nice sign in. That seems to be an important factor. If someone just goes to a station, there's no contact information, it seems like that's certainly a risk factor. And just getting out to these stations regularly to make your presence known. Clearing vegetation, from the logger boxes so that there's not this exposure to ants and vegetation and stuff like that. And then, as Jim Moore did, protecting the wires with conduit. When there's chewing issues like shown here, you can protect these wires with metal conduit. Just note, we've had a few times whenever there was pesticide or cleaner or chemicals sprayed into the logger, and that's not good for the Mayfly logger. So just, make sure about, don't put any foreign type sprays or chemicals in there. That's our
I mean, even if you get ants in there, don't.
Yeah, even if you get ants in there, just do your best to clear them out, and then just try to determine why they were in there in the first place. It probably had to do with some seam not being fully closed or a latch not being closed or something like that. Someone may be trying to pry the box open and damaging the hinges so that they don't fully close, something like that. So all these types of fails, it's all just being attentive to the logger being fully sealed basically and having proper signage and keeping track of things. But check, monitor regularly. Daily really is ideal. Visiting the station regularly on a weekly basis is ideal. And then doing your quality control quarterly. But really, this is an important thing to keep in mind of doing quality control whenever your readings are looking suspicious. If you get start getting spikes or higher than normal readings, just pop on out there and do a cross check with a calibrated handheld meter and just make sure, so that you can really speak authoritatively on the subject. So our next meeting is November 19th. This is being recorded, so we had to breeze through some of this. Hopefully this was a useful meeting again for folks. Please, please, please share this information with folks you're working with, volunteers, even base level introductory volunteers are, absolutely welcome to attend. So this is what what's that, Carol?
Would you like to, I know we didn't get a chance to talk about photos, but would you just like to invite people to send photos?
Yeah, I mean, you can certainly access that link and put up photos and, maybe, I don't know, certainly we can have, folks are welcome to have side discussions about this photo situation, sharing photos and stuff like that. We obviously ran out of time today. Here's the folks for the next couple of months: Darren, and then Francis, Juniper and Christine, and then Paul in February. I guess we're going to talk about conductivity next month as an intro into the winter months, salt and all that. Please be in touch if you want to be a presenter.
Hey, Dave.
Yeah.
I do, if you're finished, I do have just one quick question for Robert, and that is, what's the
for it.
size of the watershed at Angelica and then the Stillwater portion?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
What is the size of the watershed in square miles or square kilometers
Ooh.
for Angelica?
Angelica.
Angelica, I'm not sure what the average, I have to research that and look it up. I really don't know. I know as far as the Stillwater Run, the creek
Well-
itself is about 2 miles. So it's roughly, I don't know, a little more than, not quite 2 kilometers actually for the whole watershed.
Robert, when you modeled it on Model My Watershed and you showed that size of the watershed, it calculated it for you.
Let's check it out. Hang
And
on.
maybe you
couldn't-
didn't
I
get it
couldn't
on
read
the
it from there.
screenshot, but you can look it up because if you saved it or something.
Let's see here. I didn't save it, but I'm looking at total area.
Yeah, I don't want to take a lot of time. I was just curious. Thanks.
Oh, yeah, at the top of my, as far as acreage, 270.
It usually gives it in square kilometers.
Yeah, I'm trying to find that on the screenshot I have doesn't show it.
Okay.
I have,
I'll follow up with you offline then, Robert.
absolutely. Shoot me an email if you like.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Okay, very good.
It shows up in 2 ways, Robert. If you look at it, it'll show up in top line almost, rounded off to square kilometers, and then depending on how land use is summed, whether it on the land use, it'll sum it down. And sometimes they're in meters, one's in meters and one's in kilometers, but
Yeah.
you can find it in 2 places. The one on the front page is quite often heavily summarized
Yeah,
or
I have,
rounded.
the screenshots I took, I know the one is set on water quality, so I'm not seeing the land use. I have to go look it up again. So I'm on the right page, but I'm not looking at the right tab.
Do you know what the stream distance is between your upstream and downstream sensors?
It's a little more than a half mile.
Okay, it's pretty close.
Yeah, it's fairly close. I'd say between a half and 3/4.
Okay. Well, with the group that's on here now, the names I see, we could probably stay on here for another hour and a half and just talk, but I don't think we want to do that. So if there's, is there anything else that's pressing from anyone? No?
David, I just wanted to say, I host other Zoom meetings that require people to dial in from their telephones. And if you haven't used that feature, I have some experience with setting that up.
Okay.
I don't know if you have that or not.
Well, I know Paul called in from his phone today. He just called in, so I guess he managed
You may
to
have
do
it
that.
already.
Yeah, I'm on Zoom on the phone though, so I don't know if there's other ways to do it as well, probably.
Okay. Yeah.
So I
well,
downloaded the Zoom app. It's on the phone.
Okay.
You have to have a paid membership and there's a few settings you have to change.
Okay. Yeah, I
It's
don't
very
know. I mean,
convenient.
Zoom did some sort of change to their format, to their software, and I'm hoping that I'm not going to have to reshare the whole link for this meeting. But there have been some kind of things that haven't been functioning quite right. So
Yeah, I should say I didn't have to pay for anything for the app or whatever. It was a free download, and I'm here. It'd probably be different if I was trying to host by my phone.
yeah.
Only the host needs to have a paid membership
Yeah.
for that feature.
All right. Well, this will be posted to the Wiki Watershed DRWI site, and thanks everyone for attending. And if there's nothing else, we can end the meeting. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, David.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Okay,
Bye.
bye. And there's 3 of us left, and Carol has her head in her hand. Carol, you're also muted.
I think she might be.
Or is
She
she
might be
talking
talking
to
on the
someone
phone.
else?
Yeah. Anyway, I
What'd you think, George?
thought it was good. It was, obviously, had some time runovers, but it was good. It was, I mean, I thought, I love John Jackson's presentation, so I don't think
Okay,
anybody
good.
was disturbed at all by the length of time. It's,
No, I just feel a little silly when I say at the beginning, this is time for us to talk and network and stuff.
yeah,
And then, and then the presentations run through the entire hour.
yeah,
But I mean,
True.
I went too long. I went 2 minutes over, and then Robert went over, and then John blew way past his 15 minutes.
yeah.
So
Well,
he
it's,
went
it's,
12 minutes over. So
so it's not every day, people get to hear John Jackson,
that's true.
talk about temperatures. So I think it's,
Yeah,
it was,
yeah.
it was worth it.
That's what I figured, and just I didn't want to interrupt him or anything. It seems like there aren't a whole lot of pressing questions, anyway. So I don't know if our
Right.
format of trying to have 25 minutes for that is worthwhile anyways.
Yeah.
But maybe we should try this coming month to, talk about the format and see if we want to really kind of adjust the format in some more official way for the November meeting. Darren is going to talk forever, I have a
Yeah.
feeling.
I mean, I personally find it interesting to hear the presentations. I mean,
Maybe that's the
Yeah.
format we want. I mean, maybe we don't necessarily need a big time for discussion, because it doesn't seem like people are super, wanting to just have big group discussions anyways. It seems like people are happy to just take in the information and ask questions about the presentations. And, Tom brought up something today, but,
Right.
there wasn't a whole lot of people chomping at the bit to mention this or that about their personal stations,
right. I mean, yeah, I think it would be, you're right. I mean, I think we still covered a couple people's issues and questions.
I am recording again. Well,
Oh,
I'm going to stop recording, and John's calling me. Hopefully we don't have to edit this time. I didn't say anything inappropriate, did I?
no.
All right. Hi, people watching.